I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation, the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. John was found in the snow as a blizzard was hitting Canton, Massachusetts, and the scene was chaotic and confusing. Here's the story. In the early morning hours of January 29, 2022, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was discovered unresponsive in the snow outside of 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. His girlfriend Karen Reed, along with Jennifer McCabe and Kerry Roberts, found him after a night of concern over his whereabouts. Karen Reed, visibly distressed, attempted CPR and was allegedly heard repeatedly asking, "Did I hit him?" First responders, including EMT Katie McLaughlin, arrived shortly after and testified to hearing Karen Reed say, "I hit him," multiple times. The scene was chaotic, with fresh snow complicating the preservation of evidence. John O'Keefe was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. A medical examiner later reported abrasions on his right arm, facial lacerations, and skull fractures, with hypothermia as a contributing factor. The circumstances of his death have led to 2 trials for Karen Reed, who's been accused of running over John O'Keefe and has been charged with his murder. So during the program this hour, really going to zoom in on those first moments in the morning when John O'Keefe's body has been discovered. We're going to take a look at the people who were responding and exactly what was going on in those early moments before the investigation really began. Let's start by taking a look at the dash cam arrival of the first responder to respond. And as we take a look at this, it gives you some idea of what is going on at the scene. The emergency vehicle pulls up. It's behind the other vehicle that the 3 women were in, Karen Reed, Jennifer McCabe, and Kerry Roberts. And we can see various people coming in and out and moving around. The audio really doesn't exist here. There's some faint audio in some portions of it, but nothing that really tells the story. But we do have this video. So, again, focusing on these first moments of the response to John O'Keefe being found on the front yard of 34 Fairview brings us to the first question in our investigation. Who were the first responders to the scene? Because we know a lot of first responders showed up. We know a lot of people end up on that front yard during the course of the morning and into the day. But who were the first responders to the scene? Here to help us unpack all of this, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. He is also the host of the very popular Body Bags podcast and, of course, does incredible work at Jacksonville State University. Great to have you here. Okay, Cody, what do we know about when these first, I keep calling them the first responders, because I really want to zero in on those beginning moments of all of this.
Well, Vinny, we do know there were 4 critical first responders who initially arrived to the scene. Now, all 4 of them testified during the first trial in 2024, and only so far 2 of them have testified in the current retrial. Now, let's start off with who got there absolutely first, the car with that dash cam. That is Canton Police Officer Stephen Seraph. Now, that's his dash cam that we've seen throughout the first trial and throughout this retrial, showing the frantic behavior of Reed, Kerry Roberts, and Jennifer McCabe. Now, he gets to the scene at around 6:10 a.m. and he says he saw what looked like Reed trying to give John O'Keefe CPR, but he also noted that Reed looked visibly upset. Now, Vinny, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, these are all EMTs and firefighters and emergency personnel. We have Katie McLaughlin, who has testified in the first trial and now this current retrial. She's a firefighter and EMT. We have Timothy Nuttall, who's a paramedic who has also testified in both trials, and also fourth, Anthony Flumati. He's a firefighter and was the lead paramedic that night as well. And all three of these people arrive at roughly the same time, within a minute or so of each other, because they're all essentially responding to the same emergency dispatch. Now, they all arrive around 6:12-ish, about 2-3 minutes after Officer Sheriff arrives. Now, Nuttall and Flumati initially go straight over to O'Keefe's body near that infamous flagpole and start working the scene as they see fit. McLaughlin brings out a gurney with others from her team, and then she begins taking in information from Reed, Jen McCabe, Carrie Roberts, date of birth, things of that nature. But Vinnie, the common denominator between all of these people, all of them say that they saw Reed as clearly frantic, clearly visibly upset. So those are the four critical players, those first responders, as you say.
So you've got those four, obviously the first people there, Karen Reed, Jennifer McCabe, and Kerry Roberts, but I want to focus on these first responders. Joseph Scott Morgan, when we're looking at this video and the scene, it's so different than looking at an investigation. And we're going to talk about the investigation and what the alleged crime scene is telling us in the next segment. But right now, when you think about what's on the minds of the first responders as they show up, their focus is very different than the folks who are going to come afterwards.
Yeah, it is. It's not about forensic science at this point. It's not about crime scene processing. It's about saving a life. That's their whole goal. And God bless first responders, right? So when they roll up, what they're trying to do is assess the status of the patient at this point in time. They're trying to evacuate this individual from the scene to a hospital where they can be treated. Now, this one EMT that begins to kind of question Reed at the scene, her purpose is, when she identifies her and any of the other principals that might have been out there, they're just trying to understand what happened, because this feeds back in to whatever treatment course they're going to take. Because understand, when these guys leave the firehouse and they roll out, they don't know what they're rolling up to. They're rolling in there and they know that they've got somebody that's unresponsive in the snow, which complicates matters, and they want to do a general overall assessment, get them on the gurney, get them back in the truck, and get them to the hospital.
And the difficulty here is it's not clear that morning how exactly he ended up on the front yard. And arguably, for everyone watching the trial and for the first jury who listened to all the evidence, it wasn't exactly clear how he ended up on that front yard. How important do you think that would be, Joseph Scott Morgan, for the folks who are trying to treat him and look for injuries and try to figure out what needs to be treated? How important is that information, which arguably at this point still isn't definitively been determined?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is to get the information from the reporter who, and when I say reporter, I'm not talking about news reporter. We refer to the reporters at scenes as the individuals that are either the finder or the person that's trying to render aid at any particular time. You know, have them respond to you, because one of the big questions is that they would ask is, at any point in time during this moment when you have discovered Mr. O'Keefe's body, was he ever responsive? Was his chest rising and falling? Did he react to pain? Was he moaning? Did he say anything? So that's kind of at a very elemental level. Now, they might be questioning, you know, what happened? Do you know if he had been drinking tonight? Do you know if he had maybe been struck by a car? Do you know if there was anybody that was there that may have attacked him? And I think the biggest question is, what the hell's he doing at this house? You know, why is the house the center of all of this? Because, again, the first responders, they don't know this. They're coming into this cold, Vinny.
Yeah, and Cody, the other thing that we've learned through this, and when you look at these first responders, and the defense is making a big deal about this, is that there's a fellow Boston police officer who could be a first responder as well, that lives in that home that didn't come out. So you add that to the fact, and people are wondering what exactly happened here. Would that person have any information? But the first responders wouldn't be able to get any information from him because he's not outside.
Absolutely, Vinny. And as I said, some of them have testified in both trials, and none of these first responders have said anything about anyone coming out of the house. In fact, they say no one came out of the house who was in there. So again, you know, we know that some Boston police officers lived at that house. They kind of have a moral obligation to come out and check and see if everything's okay. But those first responders were not able to get any of that information.
Joseph Scott Morgan, we know he was declared dead when they brought him back to the hospital. For first responders, that's not part of their job, is it, to make those sort of declarations? But can they make that sort of assessment?
Yeah, they can. And when they roll up to the ER, you know, who they're met by at the ramp, you know, when they're offloading and coming in, and you've seen this portrayed in a multitude of television programs.
Well, The Pit. Everybody's watching The Pit right now. I'm watching The Pit.
Yeah, and
that's a great
you've got
example.
This communication that's rather fevered that's going on at this moment in time, and that's actually a pretty accurate portrayal. They're throwing information back and forth. Essentially, the first responders have seen what was out there. They've brought this individual in, and again, you have to think about the medical personnel at the ER. They're responding just the way that the first responders responded. What is this? Why is he here? Now, they would have talked to them over the radio on the way in. They may have even had an EKG hooked up. You never know, because that information can be transferred from the truck to the emergency room. They'd be running a strip, that sort of thing. But when you're thinking about this, they're blind as well. So they're trying to glean this information, because here's what's key. They have to understand, can we run a code on this guy? That means, can we start the process of trying to resuscitate him by pushing drugs, by using an ambu bag, by doing cardiac shock, anything that we can do to bring him back from the brink? And unfortunately, it was too late.
Okay, here's the good news. Cody's going to join us a little bit later in the program. Joseph Scott Morgan is going to stay with us, because we're going to tap his brain coming up next. And we're going to ask the question, what story does the death scene tell?
His body was completely covered, but his head was completely covered.
Is Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was framed!
Karen Reed is accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend.
Defendant stated repeatedly, I hit him, I hit him.
She may end up taking the stand. Her first trial ended with a hung jury. They haven't proven anything.
Will a jury finally agree on a verdict? We know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
The issue regarding glass, I expect, is going to be a issue in the next case, and I say that because we learned last night for the first time on a public airing of an episode that the defendant suggests that Mr. O'Keefe took her vodka soda glass out of her car. Now, that is the first time we've had any statements from Miss Reed suggesting that, and also there was another statement regarding a claim that Miss Reed pulled glass from John O'Keefe's face.
Part of the new evidence in the retrial of Karen Reed, and prosecutors seizing upon statements made by Karen Reed in media interviews, and they're saying he's going to use them and will be using them against Karen Reed, including evidence from the scene when Kerry Roberts, Jennifer McCabe first get there, that she's pulling glass from John O'Keefe's face. Speaking of Kerry Roberts, I want you to take a listen to her testimony and what she observed when they came upon John O'Keefe in the snow on the front yard.
His body was completely covered, but his head was completely covered. So I started to dig around his face and his eyes, and his left eye was fine, but his right eye looked like it was huge. His legs were covered, his arms were by his side, he was on his back. Karen had lifted up his shirt, so now his shirt was down, but I was doing chest compressions so you could see his clothing. He had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. And when I put the baby blankets under the back of him, there was blood on the blanket, so I think he had a cut on the back of his head.
So, this information and the rest of the information that is coming in from the first responders and the folks who were there at the scene initially brings us to the next question in our investigation. What story does the death scene tell? Let's bring back Joseph Scott Morgan, death investigator. Okay. Let me start here with what we just heard from Kerry Roberts, her description of what she saw. What does that tell you? What questions does it bring to mind to you as an investigator?
Well, it doesn't necessarily bring a question to mind, but it's something that draws my attention relative to the element of time. Because keep in mind, what they're talking about is coverage with snowfall. And again, they keep mentioning, the term a nor'easter, that this, really robust storm had rolled through there. And so when you've got coverage that, and by her own admission, what she has said, that the face is covered, the legs are covered, so they're having to clear all of this off. So as we know, there's an element of time that is involved here. For me, as an investigator, one of my biggest worries is that you're going to lose certain elements of evidence that are there, things that are very tiny, things that are very fragile, where let's just say if we have a death that occurs on a warm summer night, even if it's outdoors like that, you're not going to have to fight the fight of having to deal with layering of snow over the surface. And also, it's not just the surface of the body, but it's the surrounding area. And when we get off into the testimony that was provided by the one Canton officer talking about using a snowblower, to kind of clear away, that newly formed snow or the newly fallen snow, as opposed to that layer of packed snow below it, that adds another problematic area in here as far as evidence recovery is concerned, Vin.
Yeah, and you talk about the snow that day. They say, because a meteorologist testified in court and said by the morning about 3 to 4 inches of snow. But as the investigation is continuing, the nor'easter is continuing, they end up with 2 feet of snow by the end of that day.
One of the telling things in the earlier segment, we saw, the EMTs there, and you've got the dash cam. I'm a Southern boy, but I got to tell you, I was impressed by the volume of snow that was coming down at that moment in time, that you can actually capture there. You can see it kind of whistling about, and that just adds another layer to this as far as complicating the circumstances, Ben.
And how much does it complicate circumstances where you have a victim who, when the first responders get there, they are attempting life-saving procedures. They are removing him as quickly as possible from the scene where we now know he died. So how much does that impact the investigation and impact trying to piece together what happened here?
Well, let's take the first part. First off, the biggest thing, when you go back and you work this scene, you're working a scene without a body. So you lose all context. Completely. Anything that they had done in their life-saving measures, and again, that's their job, understand that. When they remove him, they're also taking away the biggest piece of evidence you have, not being disrespectful, but John O'Keefe's body is the central focal point of evidence at this point in time. Now, I find it very interesting, I have all along with this case, and it's kind of maybe it's rather simplistic, but to understand that the ME eventually rules his death as not just blunt force trauma to the head, Vin, but she rules the cause of death, a contributing factor, as hypothermia, which means both of these events occurred at that location. Now, I'm not saying he couldn't have been brought from another location to be deposited there, but if in fact he died right there by that head strike, it wasn't an immediate death, Vin, okay? Because they're seeing manifestations of hypothermia relative to this. I'd be very interested, I think, for me personally, most of the time when you roll someone into an emergency room, many times they'll try to assess a core body temperature on somebody, particularly up in the northern regions like this, just to try to understand. I'm talking about the medical folks, try to understand what they're doing, because there's a whole procedure you have to go through to bring somebody back from the brink relative to hypothermia. So hypothermia is a contributing factor along with this blunt force trauma to the back of his head. Remember, she mentioned that when she put that blanket or the towels or whatever it was, I think blankets, she noticed that there was blood beneath him. As it turns out, there's a copious amount of blood because it's issuing from this insult to the back of his head.
Now, we also heard testimony from the meteorologist talking about the soil was frozen that night. What are your thoughts about the potential impact of the head on the soil? Could that do it?
Yeah, it could. And it all depends on how long it has, the robustness, let's say, of the freezing that has gone on. Any of us that have been in a frozen environment, even if you're not on asphalt or concrete, you know, because you're a northern guy, you know that underlying strata that you're talking about becomes hard as concrete. So when you're knocked back perhaps by a vehicle or whatever the case might be, if you impact the underlying surface, that's almost going to be just as dangerous as striking, say, the paved area on a driveway, Vin.
All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator. Body Bags is the podcast. Always great to have your insight. We've been trying to get you. We finally landed you tonight, so we do appreciate it. I know you're very, very busy.
Thank you.
Okay, up next, which first responders heard a confession? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. The words and actions of Karen Reed at the scene when John's body was discovered are a big part of the prosecution's case. Did she confess? Was she frantic? Here's the story. On January 29, 2022, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in the snow outside of 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. Karen Reed, his girlfriend, along with Jennifer McCabe and Kerry Roberts, discovered his body. Karen Reed was visibly distressed, reportedly repeating, "I hit him," according to EMT Katie McLaughlin's testimony. Dashcam video from first responders captured the chaotic scene, showing Reed's emotional state as emergency personnel arrived. Prosecutors allege that Karen Reed, after a night of drinking, struck John with her SUV and left him to die. The defense counters that John was fatally injured during a confrontation inside the house and that the scene was staged to implicate Karen. The dashcam video has become a focal point in the trial, with the defense arguing it reveals inconsistencies in witness testimony and potential investigative oversights. As the retrial unfolds, the video continues to be scrutinized for insights into the events of that tragic morning and uncovering the truth about what happened to John O'Keefe. And again, we're focusing on these very first moments after John O'Keefe's body is found on the front yard of 34 Fairview. We're talking about Jennifer McCabe, obviously in the car, along with Kerry Roberts and Karen Reed. But then the first responders who show up and also try to save John O'Keefe's life, but in the meantime are observing things at the scene, all of which now loom very large in the retrial of Karen Reed. Let's take a listen to Jennifer McCabe. She had a lot of important testimony for both sides of this case, who are trying to prove their perspectives on what happened here. But Jennifer McCabe here talking about what Karen Reed was saying at the scene.
when she got on the phone, I had told her, Karen, I saw you guys outside of my sister's house. And then she told me she didn't remember being there. And then she went on to say, she started saying, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? I don't. And then she just was just all over the place, like screaming my name, screaming so many different things. She was hard to follow or understand.
And this brings us really to the foundation of the prosecution case. Because from their perspective, the whole notion of John O'Keefe being struck by Karen Reed, they say, comes directly from Karen Reed herself. And it began with the phone call to Jennifer McCabe saying, did I hit him? And then we get to the scene. Karen Reed is there, as I said, Kerry Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, and those first responders, which brings us to the next question in our investigation. Which first responders heard a confession? Who heard an alleged confession by Karen Reed? Who are they? Where were they? When was it? What do we know about it? Bringing in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who has been going through all of the testimony, all of the evidence in this case. Also with us, longtime Massachusetts attorney, former chief homicide prosecutor in that same courthouse in Norfolk County, Richard Grundy. You know him, folks. Okay, Cody, what do we know about the confessions that the first responders say that they heard that morning?
Well, Vinny, important to note that there were 4 critical first responders who arrived to the scene. Initially, all of them arrived within minutes of each other. You see them on your screen right there. Officer Stephen Seraph, paramedic Anthony Flamati, paramedic Timothy Nuttall, and firefighter EMT Katie McLaughlin. Now, they all say they heard that infamous phrase from Karen Reed, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. But we'll begin first with Officer Stephen Seraph. He was the absolute first one on the scene. That's the dash cam video we've seen throughout both trials. Now, he has not taken the stand just yet in this retrial, but take a listen to what he told the court during the first trial about what he saw when he initially arrived to the scene.
Miss Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, this is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this. And she was very hysterical. And she kept asking, he's dead. Is he dead? Is he dead?
So you heard it right there, Vinny. According to Officer Seraph, he says Reed was taking the blame when he arrived, saying it was pretty much her fault. Now that brings us forward to paramedic Timothy Nuttall, who arrived shortly after Officer Seraph with other EMT personnel. Now he has testified in both trials. Here's what he said on the stand during the retrial, which is pretty much the same thing that he said during the original trial. Take a listen.
Is this your first assessment?
Yes, sir. This is ascertaining any signs of life or breathing.
Is that you approaching?
Yes, sir.
Could you stop, please? After informing you return, is that after firefighter Flamati called you?
So right after that, when I turned around, that was when Tony said, hey, we're working this.
And do you see a person come over to where you are?
Yes, sir.
Is it at that point or another moment when the defendant said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
It was right there, sir.
Now, Vinny, we heard Nuttall's voice right there, but if you paid attention to the actual dash cam video, you could see the timestamp in that video, and Nuttall says that he heard that confession around 6:12 a.m., which brings us even farther forward to the lead paramedic, Anthony Flamati, who Nuttall was just talking about, who he referred to as Tony. Now, Flamati has also not testified during the retrial just yet, but he was near Timothy Nuttall on the scene. They arrived together in the same vehicle, in the same EMT vehicle. He told the court in the first trial that he began administering epinephrine to John O'Keefe at around 6:20 a.m., but that was after he heard the alleged confession. Take a listen.
The only response that I was personally given was just, I hit him, oh my God, I hit him. So she was within 2 feet of me, but very loud. Any type of follow-up questioning, did you hit him with your hand? Did you kick him? What happened? She just repeated the phrase over and over again, I hit him, I hit him.
And Vinnie, this brings us to the fourth player of the first responders that arrived to that scene. That is paramedic and firefighter Katie McLaughlin, who has testified again during both trials. And then during the retrial, she testified to hearing the alleged confession at around 6:16 a.m., according to the time displayed on that dash cam video. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Do you see yourself on that screen?
Yes,
What color jacket?
the red and yellow.
And who's to your left?
Miss Reed.
And across from you, with the blue or black jacket with the hood. Do you know who that is at this time?
Miss McCabe.
And you didn't know her at the time?
No.
Do you see the officer that's turned away from you?
Yes.
Do you know who he's speaking to?
No.
Do you know the exact moment that the defendant told you, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I think it was just prior to that.
So, Vinnie, they all say they heard that same nuanced phrase, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, 3 times. Officer Serif saying that he even heard her say that this was all her fault.
Okay, Rick Grundy, let's just recap what Cody just told us. Officer Serif, first on the scene, hears, this is all my fault. Anthony Flamati hears, I hit him 3 times. Timothy Nuttall hears the alleged confession at 6:12 a.m. Katie McLaughlin hears an alleged confession just before 6:16 a.m. Here's my question to you. This is the second trial. We had a first trial. We had this testimony. Prosecutors had this evidence. Why wasn't the first jury convinced by this evidence? This is direct evidence.
Well, I think the answer to that is that the Commonwealth has a very high burden to prove any case beyond a reasonable doubt to a near moral certainty. And as we've seen and discussed over the last few nights, there's a lot of imperfections in each witness and the cumulative effect of that. Now, we talked about whether it's Miss McCabe or Kelly, isn't this a problem? Isn't that a problem? And I've consistently said, yeah, that's a bump in the road. But again, the way they're playing it goes into this grand conspiracy, which is very difficult to prove. But what we're seeing now is that you don't prove your case through 1 or 2 or 3 witnesses in a case of this magnitude. It's a jigsaw puzzle. And as more and more of the pieces go in, then you start to get a drumbeat, and I think that's what really beats down the Commonwealth's case. So look at what we've got coming up. We've got Higgins coming up.
We've got all those problems coming up, but 4 first responders who are going there to save a life. They're not investigators. They're not law enforcement. Well, one is law enforcement, Sarif, but the other 3, I mean, all of them consistently saying what they heard, a confession at the scene as soon as they arrived. Within minutes, they're hearing a confession from the defendant. Why didn't that first jury, why weren't they convinced by it? Because I'm listening to it now and I'm like, should I even consider this evidence at this point if it didn't convince the first jury?
So I think the other factor to keep in mind is I think this first jury just had a very difficult start throughout with the instructions and never got past that with respect to the instructions. And they were hung up on that murder charge, that second-degree murder charge that shouldn't be there. And it sounds like they were leaning towards, I think it was about 3/5 of the jury was leaning, according to what we heard, was leaning towards the accidental responsible, but it was an accident.
Right.
So I think that's where the I hit him maybe caused the divide. Yes, she did, but she didn't do it purposely. So, again, you got that second degree there. I think they're trying the case a little smarter this time as opposed to really hammering away at that second degree. that, the word accident is coming out. And
I think you need it. I think you need it to prove this. And all right, so Rick's going to stay with us. Cody, thank you. Great reporting as always. Still to come. What does Karen Read's demeanor prove?
There was a woman next to us who told her to calm down, stop talking, calm down, you're hysterical.
It's been my passion to work in nursing homes.
One of our residents passed away.
On the next Interview with a Killer.
You watched and stood by while your patient was lying there being tortured.
What else was I supposed to do?
That's so conniving. You understand that? So much for your career in caretaking.
Interview with a Killer, season finale, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out?
There's Karen Read in one of the interview clips. That one's from Dateline, where prosecutors are using that as alleged admissions to a certain extent. At least that one. Could I have hit him? Could I have clipped him? Which again is consistent with what other witnesses have reported her saying, some form of either in the question form or in the statement form about hitting John O'Keefe. Now, the other thing that's been pretty consistent is the description of her demeanor, and we've seen some of it in the dash cam video where you see her going back and forth and the way she is acting. Let's listen to more of a description of how Karen Read was acting when they arrived at 34 Fairview the following morning and found John O'Keefe.
What's going on? Is he face down?
We just stripped him over.
Okay. And who's that in the background? Is that someone related?
That's his girlfriend. He has John O'Keefe. Carrie, I don't know if you remember. There are two women trying to it was body and they're hysterical.
Okay, can you just try to ask him? I know it's tough, but we have to decide where I'm going. I just got to know.
Okay. Is he breathing? It doesn't seem to be breathing.
Okay, do they know how to do CPR? Do they want to attempt CPR?
Yes, he's got to do CPR.
There was a woman next to us who told her to calm down, stop talking, calm down, you're hysterical.
So there's been a lot of testimony, a lot of evidence about this. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. And this is important when it comes to the trial and the jury, which is, what does Karen Read's demeanor prove? You know, I've seen demeanor evidence come up in most of the trials that we talk about, especially ones involving boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. And inevitably, I hear the argument that, you know, you never know how you're going to react to something, right? And the prosecution always makes it look nefarious, and the defense is always like, well, how is there a playbook on how you're supposed to react here? So let's bring in our guests who are going to help us through all of this. Clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and author of the book, The New Rules of Attachment, Dr. Judy Ho, and still with us, Rick Grundy, great attorney. All right, Dr. Judy Ho, what does it prove when, you know, in light of the circumstances of where all this is happening, Karen Read's demeanor?
Well, Vinny, I think that a lot of people are looking for big emotions, something that would maybe seem more humane, but of course, everyone responds so differently to this type of circumstance. This is of course, very, very crucial trial for her. And this could be a type of an emotional regulation strategy where she's trying to look like she's very calm, as if she is essentially not having any emotion that anyone can pick up on. She doesn't want people to read her. There could be a shock or dissociation factor as well. And of course, the personality factors. It's possible that this is a more reserved or restrained person. And even from some of her previous messages with her ex-boyfriend, it appears that there was that type of dynamic between them as well at times.
Okay, Rick, let's talk about two things. So we've got the demeanor in court. Dr. Judy Ho nailed that pretty well. Let's talk about the demeanor at the scene. What do you think a jury's going to take away from the way Karen Read is acting at the scene that morning?
Well, Vinnie, so if I'm the prosecutor in this case, I'm going to try and expand that lens a little bit to incorporate, let's say, picking up at the Waterfall Bar to when the alleged incident happened, to her going back home, and then at the scene and that demeanor, and analyze it in that full picture. And I don't want you to make any judgments on me based on this, but to me, it demonstrates a person who was highly intoxicated, who was angry in an anger, that type of anger fueled by alcohol, who took off, went home, and basically blacked out. Woke up several hours later with a hazy memory of what happened, and in a panic started calling people, driving around, and ends up on that scene. And the demeanor I see on that scene, in my opinion, fits 100% to a person who's just coming out of a drunken stupor and knows something went bad and they blacked out, but they don't know exactly what.
Okay, Dr. Judy Ho, I'd like you to pick up on that. And I think there's an interesting part of that when you add alcohol to the equation, because it is part of the case. We've had testimony about her blood alcohol level, according to prosecutors. So what are your thoughts?
Well, Vinnie, alcohol is a disconstraint. It's something that will allow people to act on their impulses, and they're not going to be acting in their executive function, their higher order thinking, especially when they've become intoxicated beyond a certain point. And there was a very conflictual history between the two. And maybe there's been even times when she's imagined, well, it might just be great if I could just get rid of him. But when she's in her quote unquote right mind, not intoxicated, she may not act on it in that exact same way that she may have acted on it that night, which she is accused of doing. And I think that there is something to that. And then, of course, when you wake up, there's a memory lapse. That is also the neurochemical basis for what happens the night after a big drinking binge, if that is what happened. And so there's going to be pieces that she doesn't remember. And also, when somebody has gone through some kind of traumatic event, even if they might have caused it themselves, there's also proven memory lapses where you don't remember certain aspects of what happened.
All right, Rick, we only have about 15 seconds here left, maybe 20. The jury in Massachusetts, when it comes to drinking, are they hard on people, or are they a little softer on people when they've been drinking?
Well, when I was a very young prosecutor, I used to think and then tell, as I trained young prosecutors, it's the one case you'll try where you got a good chance of everybody on the jury having committed the crime. So it depends really on the level of it. And I think, you know, when people, you know, stumble off, don't hold the leg up for 30 seconds or something, juries can be kind to them. But this is on a whole
different
level.
There's a man dead on the front yard. Okay, Dr. Judy Ho, Rick Grundy, we are out of time. Appreciate it. You know, the job of this jury is to find the truth. To do that, they have to judge the words and the actions of everyone involved, including Karen Read. And that's the big difference with this retrial. The jury is not only hearing witnesses describe Karen Read, they are seeing the video and listening to her recordings with the media. The question is, are those words proving the prosecution's case or raising reasonable doubt? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.